Hello and welcome. In today's video, I'm continuing with my series breaking down the Kybalion and the 7 Hermetic principles, and in today's video, I'm talking about the law of polarity, the principle of polarity. In this video, I'll be sharing what the principle of polarity means, some of the spiritual wisdom, the little bit more of the undefinable information that this principle is here to teach us on this three-dimensional plane of existence. But if you stay till the end of this video, I'll be sharing implementable strategies and steps that I've used to be able to better master this principle of polarity in my life so that I can have more emotional freedom and liberation and also attract more beautiful things into my life. Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Gabby and I'm here to help you be the hero of your story. So in this video series, I've been taking the book, The Kybalion, written by the 3 initiates, and I've been breaking down chapter by chapter my perception and my own implementation of the wisdom of the Kybalion. Now, if you haven't already read the Kybalion yourself, if you don't know what the Kybalion is, you should definitely go back to video 1 in this playlist, in this video series, to understand what the Kybalion is in the first place. But as a general, super brief overview, the Kybalion is essentially a compilation of the teachings of a man, or if he was a man, known as Hermes Trismegistus. And Hermes Trismegistus is essentially said to be the original philosopher, the original teacher, and from his teachings was the creation of all ideas, and the creation of all religions essentially stemmed from the teachings of Hermes Trismegistus. Now, the Kybalion is not something that is religious, it's just teachings of the nature of reality that essentially comes down into 7 Hermetic principles. The 7 Hermetic principles are essentially the foundation for which our reality, this three-dimensional reality, can operate. Now, the teachings, these 7 Hermetic principles, they teach us not only the nature of reality, but when mastered, they give us our true creator power back. We have this, essentially this alchemy, this magical power in this reality to, as you may know, manifest amazing things. We have quite the law of attraction has become growingly popular because we are starting to tap into this realization that everything is energy on this plane of existence, and everything that is one of the teachings of Hermetic philosophy, that everything is energy, everything is vibration. In fact, principle 1 states that the all is mind and the universe is mental, and so we're all in this one collective source field. Then we have the principle of vibration that highly builds upon that. We also have the principle of correspondence that we've touched on. And the principle of correspondence states how everything reflects one another, as within, so without, as above, so below. And so again, if you haven't checked out my other videos, be sure to check those out before you dive into this video, because here's the amazing part about the 7 Hermetic principles. Each one is very intentionally built upon the last one. If you don't have a good understanding of the one that came before, the next one's not going to fully make sense to you. On top of that, as we get towards the end of these Hermetic principles, Hermetic philosophy here, in theory, these videos should be getting shorter. They probably won't, knowing me, because I can talk about these things for quite some time, but in theory, the understanding should actually become easier. They're really, if you grasp the first one, the second one, the third one, these ones toward the end really just kind of naturally fall into place. You just hear it initially and you probably are just going to say, oh yeah, that makes sense, given that I know that the all is mind, given that I know as above, so below, given that I know that everything is energy and everything is vibration. And so now, here we are at principle, I believe we're in principle number 4, the principle of polarity. So in this video, if you don't already know, I'm going to dive into just my personal perception of taking this knowledge that I've looked at in this book and how I interpret it into my own wisdom. And you can take my knowledge that I'm sharing with you and you can interpret it into your own wisdom. The whole point of the Kybalion is not to be dogmatic, but it's about applying this knowledge into your own self, integrating it into yourself, because that's how you turn knowledge into wisdom. So as an overview, this is what the principle of polarity states in the Kybalion itself, written by the 3 initiates. Everything is dual. Everything has its poles. Everything has its pair of opposites. Like and unlike are the same. Opposites are identical in nature but different in degree. Extremes meet. All truths are but half-truths. All paradoxes may be reconciled. I mean, that overview kind of summarizes all of it. And like I said, if you've read the first 3, if you've understood the first 3, immediately this is going to make sense, because there's a very close correlation in this principle to, again, energy, but also this one has a high correlation to, I would say, the law of correspondence, the principle of correspondence, where everything is reflected, everything as above, so below. Polarity is this reflection. It's this opposition of reflection. And so the first thing I wanted to start with is actually a quote, not by the Kybalion, but actually by Carl Jung, because I think is a good demonstration of another tier of understanding of the general gist of what this principle of polarity is. And so the quote is that, "But there is no energy unless there is a tension of opposites. Hence, it is necessary to discover the opposite to the attitude of the conscious mind." Of course, Carl Jung, given that he created Jungian psychology and how he was one of the founders of modern psychology, of course, his perspective of this is how we cannot understand the conscious if we cannot understand the unconscious mind. And he kind of touched on that in that quote, but the beginning of the quote is really the key part. It's the same as the principle of polarity. There is no energy unless there is a tension of opposites. And this is the first place I want to start with this. Polarity is essentially the idea that this three-dimensional reality operates on opposition. It operates on these axes. Now, we talk about astrology a lot on this channel, and I don't necessarily talk about astrology a lot, but Isabel creates videos every single day all about astrology. And now, astrology is highly correlated to the Kybalion. The reason for this is because Hermes Trismegistus himself was known as and is seen as the initial teacher and philosopher of astrology, alchemy, and psychology. So, in a way, all astrology, all alchemy, and all psychology stem back and root back in Hermes Trismegistus' teachings. The idea of polarity, though, is the fact that we cannot see the middle unless there is extremes. And this kind of makes sense. It makes sense in, like, how would we have the gray space in the middle if there were not black and white? The perfect example of this is to take love and hate. I think love and hate is the first one that I can think of. I personally myself remember coming to a realization in my life that I could only love the people in my life that I hated, or rather the opposite. If I hated someone in my life, it was the person that meant the most to me, or rather it was the people who I've experienced the greatest amount of unconditional love in my life for. We cannot know joy if we do not know sadness. We cannot know pleasure if we do not know pain. We can't know what good is if we haven't seen what evil is, and we can't know what evil is if we haven't seen what good is. We can't know an experience of abundance if we haven't experienced lack at some point in our lives. We commonly understand that we can't know positive things without negative, but have you really integrated this knowledge into yourself? I remember at one point in my life, I was out on this hike with my mom and my sister, and I was telling them how I'm so grateful in retrospect for all of the negative things I've gone through my life. And, negative is a relative term. Negative to your own personal journey, your own personal experience. But I remember saying to them that I literally cannot know the happiness and the joy of this moment if I hadn't gone through the suffering that I experienced at certain points in my life. If all we knew was joy, you would literally have no relativity, and joy would no longer be joy. Joy would not be joyful. Positive experiences are only positive in contrast to the opposition. Now, in the Kybalion, there's also an aspect of gray space. And they stated in a much more eloquent way, but the idea that opposites are identical in nature but different in degree. So, for example, love and hate are identical. When you experience love and hate, when you experience this with a person, it's hard to put into words how it feels unless you felt it and you've felt that experience. I mean, love inherently is a hard experience to define, especially if you've been in love. And if you experience unconditional love, maybe even with family, then that's very hard to define too, but you know it as love in your heart. But at the same time, hate is kind of that way too. If you truly experience the emotion of hate, it's hard to define, it's hard to put into words. Maybe anger, you could explain anger, you could explain jealousy. But when you experience hate, there's this part of hate that, sure, you could define parts of it, but there's this deeper emotional experience that's hard to define. Somehow, you can know in your heart that love and that hate, there is a similarity there. And I myself, as I'm explaining this to you, I wish I could come up with a better explanation to comprehend the emotional experience, but that's the state of reality. It's energy, and our five senses, and my words, and what you're hearing right now is literally less than 1% of all of the nature of reality, because we can only perceive less than 1% of existing frequencies through our five senses. And so only your intuition and your heart space can even comprehend what I'm saying right now, that love and hate are the same. But if you felt it, you felt it. And yet at the same time, they're different degrees. Another interesting component that I started touching on is how astrology acknowledges this and is probably more easy to comprehend than to say, well, can you tell that love and hate are the same? Okay, maybe you can't tell that love and hate are the same. However, if you study astrology, which is encouraged in essence by the Kybalion, we have 12 zodiacs. And I was just talking about this yesterday in our live stream that Robin and I did. We did a live stream about what eclipse season tells you, how to be the hero through eclipse season. So I was explaining in this that we have the 12 zodiacs, right? Now, if you know anything about astrology, you know that there are 12 signs, but it's a circle. And by looking at it like a circle, like a clock, there are opposites. But these opposites, whenever they're 6 apart from each other, and they lie on opposite sides of the circle of the clock, 6 and 12 on the clock are opposites. However, they're in line with each other, and therefore they are on the same axis. And so we talk about this often in the zodiac archetypes, that the opposing zodiac signs, the opposing zodiac archetypes are the epitome of polarity. Because, for example, Aries, the first sign in the zodiac, is directly opposite from Libra. And they are identical in nature, but with different degrees of expression. They are identical and the opposite at the exact same time. How can that be so? Well, Aries and Libra, for example, have everything to do with self in the world, self-expressing, self being expressed, and identity. Self and identity are highly correlated here. Aries and Libra, however, are totally opposite, because Aries is all about self and world as self, and Libra is all about self and world as other. And so these are opposites, because for the Libra archetype, self is defined by the people in our lives, the partnerships in our lives, not even just the group, the community, because that wouldn't necessarily be a direct opposite. But Aries is the 1 and Libra is the 2. And the 2, there's a tendency for the Libra to identify as the other is me. And this is not to say like it's not about your sun sign. This is just about the archetypes of the Aries and the Libra. And it's a perfect example of polarity because they share the same axis of self and world. Now, let's use a different example. Capricorn and Cancer are another perfect example of the axis of a polarity, because Capricorn is supposedly this achiever, and even though it is a feminine, I believe it's still a feminine sign, it has this masculine energy of success and discipline and responsibility and tasks and, success and achievement. There's a lot of financial influence there of wanting financial success and wanting financial security. Whereas in a way, it's the father. This is a summarization. But the Cancer is a little bit more the mother. The Cancer is the nurturer, the loving, supporting person. It's emotional. It's fluid. It's in tune with emotion. Capricorn rejects emotion. So how are these two opposites the same? They both want control. They both actually want to nurture and support, but they do so in different ways. And so the underlying axis that they are the same is that they both want control, support, and nurture. To control, support, and nurture. And yet they express themselves in completely opposite ways. And that is exactly the same as all the remaining zodiacs in axes opposed in the same ways. Pisces and Virgo, Gemini and Sagittarius, on and on and on. All of these types are on the same axis where they share the same thing, but they are different. And that is one example of the principle of polarity. But this applies in our emotional selves a little differently. So that would be, I talked about in the last 2 videos, I believe, that the Kybalion, the teaching, the principle, generally applies to alchemy, astrology, and psyche. So that's how it applies to astrology. But how does it apply to the alchemy and to the psyche? Well, in the same sense of opposites are the same in different degrees, we use these other 2 teachings of the principle of polarity to apply them to ourselves, because psyche and alchemy are very, very, very similar, because psyche is just this mind, applying it to our own mind and our brain, which is not the same as mind and brain. And alchemy is about transmuting the energy that's stored in our bodies, our chakras, transmuting the stored crystallizations in our body from past thoughts and emotions being stored in our body when we're not letting the energy express itself. Alchemy is transmuting emotion. It's about, and emotion is just energy in motion. So alchemy is really about operating on emotion, and psyche is about operating on thought. And the principle of polarity helps us here, because let's go back to those initial things I just shared. We've got love and hate, joy and sadness, pleasure and pain, and lack and abundance. Those are probably the biggest ones that are guiding points, guiding lights for applying this principle of polarity. When you are in an experience of hate, I believe that the principle of polarity helps us to have compassion for ourselves, compassion for the experience of hate, and it allows us to have gratitude for what we want to view as the negative aspects of our living experience. Literally, like I said, you cannot know love if you have not known hate. You cannot know joy if you have not known sadness. You cannot know pleasure if you haven't known pain. You cannot know abundance if you have not known lack. So when you're in experiences of lack, when you feel the restriction of lack, like there's emptiness or stagnation, if you are in an experience of suffering and this is painful and I hate this, or I'm experiencing hate, or I am sad and I am in an experience of such emotional turmoil, when you embody the principle of polarity, you understand that I am on the same axis of knowing of love. I'm on the same axis of abundance. And I think the interesting part is the next video I make about principle of rhythm is going to be very key here, because, and I'm going to touch on it slightly, principle of rhythm is basically about a balanced pendulum. I'm not going to go into it super detailed, but when you have these axes, that because we are here and we've known this pain, now this can exist. And now I think in the personal expression of this, you will kind of see this happen, because people who have not gone inward, and this is where law of correspondence also comes in, people who have not allowed themselves to swing into the deeper depths of their hatred and deeper depths of their pain and suffering. And granted, we don't want to go too deeply into that, because that's where the negative aspects of our human psyche come out, where, bad things happen, where people become, they become depressed, anxious, where people do bad things. But at the same time, if we're embracing it and we're doing that law of correspondence of as within, as far as we go within into understanding that hatred or understanding our own pain, well, now we have literally changed the three-dimensional reality to be able to know what love is. You literally broaden your horizons from an energetic capacity, from an energetic potential. You going through this world, you literally are painting the canvas as you experience certain energies. As you go inward into the energies of hatred and go into that lack, you are now creating the energetic potential in your canvas of your reality to be able for love to come into your life. You're creating opportunity for abundance to come into your life. I have used this, law of correspondence, vibration obviously comes in there too, but law of correspondence highly integrates with principle of polarity, and it's going to highly correlate to the principle of rhythm. Principle of rhythm also kind of reinforces this, what I said about correspondence. And principle of rhythm is that you will swing essentially as far back out as you swing the other way. It always will create balance. Rhythm is about balance. And again, save that for the next video. But as you go into this, you are literally almost guaranteed, and a guarantee, I use the word almost guarantee because we're gonna think that it's not a guarantee, because we tend to latch on to the way we want things to show up in our lives and be expressed. So if I say, because I swung into hatred at a certain point, I know for a fact that I am going to swing back guaranteed into love. Yes, that is a guarantee. You will swing back in equal rhythm to create balance into love. Because you swung into this hatred, you will experience love. But at the same time, your perception of what you think love is not a guarantee. If you think I experienced this hatred and therefore I'm going to meet the love of my life and we're going to get married and we're going to have all these things and we're going to go travel the world, that's what you think that love is. But are you open to the idea that love is an energy? Maybe you experience the energy of hatred, and so maybe something else is going to happen in your life. Maybe you're going to have this wonderful new career, or maybe it's not even like success. Maybe it's just that you ended up in this place in your life, you moved to a different place. Maybe you stumble upon a community that changes your life. Maybe that expression of love is a little different than what you thought love was supposed to be. But in essence, those three principles combined create this faith that when we go through a hard time, we go first A is that we go, gosh, this is amazing, you know, I'm in this experience. I wonder what the opposite is going to be, because maybe you haven't experienced what love is, but you know for a fact that you're in an experience of this is pain, this is suffering, this is lack. And you know, okay, well, I'm opening something up. I'm going inward in this way, and I know I'm going to be delivered a positive vibrational experience or a high vibrational experience in the antithesis expression of what it is I'm experiencing now. And I'm grateful. I'm grateful for this suffering that I'm going through. I'm grateful for this pain. I'm grateful for this sadness. Contradiction for us lies on the same axis. We are contradictory beings by nature. And I think it's funny because when I first got into astrology and reading natal charts, I remember somebody that read something said, like, you may notice in your chart that things contradict other parts of yourself. And how true is that, right? We contradict ourselves constantly. You'll probably have parts of you that you feel like you're at war with, where you're like, I am this, but I'm also this, and then they tend to cause conflict in our lives, but that's okay. But contradiction is the nature of reality. And this is why the Kybalion, it is true that the Kybalion paints the picture of what the fundamental nature of reality, not like this perception of what we think the fundamentals are. But everything kind of operates on this. And it's true when we see this because we see this in ourselves. So there's a quote that I wanted to share. And this is just a quote that I found when doing research on this to make this video. And so it's by Chris Matakas, who wrote a book called #Human. And the quote is that we are only different because there exists something to be different from. And it is this difference that bonds us. And that was a really beautiful quote. I got like chills when I read that right now. Whew. I mean, like, I find this another beautiful aspect of the Principle of Polarity, because Principle of Polarity, yes, I'm going to go a little deeper in a second into how it gives us a guiding point into the opposition of our axes. And also, it is a cool polarity to use between people, interrelational, interpersonal relationships in our life. We often go through our lives and we see all the differences in people. We say, oh, that person's like this person's like that, especially with people we don't like. I mean, sometimes we don't like people who are the same as us, but more often than not, we don't like people who are different than us. And we're constantly going through the world seeing how other people are different, and then sometimes we run into people who we say, oh, they're totally the opposite of me. But at the same time, we can also look at them and say, well, that's amazing, because it is because that difference exists that there is something that we can be different from. As someone who has grown up with an extremely unconventional lifestyle, here's how that literally applies to me. I think about, we were joking last night, me and my youngest sister we were having dinner, and my mom jokes, she goes, there's no normal. And it's true, right? How many people do you know that you're actually normal? And then, but at the same time, we also have this brand, and the brand is called Nomads with a Purpose, another YouTube channel. You can go check that out. It's our adventure travel brand. And the motto of Nomads with a Purpose is defy the norm. And she joked to my little sister, who's only 11 years old. She said, well, so when my mom said, there is no normal, my youngest sister goes, then how can we defy the norm? And that is what this quote is saying. That we are only different because there's that there's something to be different from. We can only defy the norm if a normal exists. Not to say that a normal exists, but everything, every single word, verbiage, physical thing, object, person, energy, everything, this principle applies to everything. And so in the words of normal and defy the norm, we can only as a family, you know, if you don't know our story, I grew up living in an RV and traveling the world with my family of 7. I'm one of 5 siblings, and my 2 parents and I, and all of us. when I was 14 years old, my parents decided to move into an RV and to go travel the world full time. And I've been living in an RV and traveling full time ever since then. And so I'm going on 8 years now of being a nomad, which is extremely unconventional. I was unschooled. I started a business when I was 15 years old. You know, we traveled and we were climbers climbing dirt bags. So we would just like live in RVs and we would go camp in the middle of nowhere. I could go on and on and on. But we could only have this normality to defy from if there was a difference to be different from. And I think this is, in the end, a great way to have compassion for your opposition. A great way to say thank you for being you. Thank you for being the opposite. Because as people who defy the norm, we can go on and we can criticize society. Like, society is so messed up. And, you know, the school system is so messed up. The financial system is about to collapse. All of these things that are wrong with society, the medical system, whatever. We can complain about it, but because it exists, we have something to be different from. And it's not about actually, because it's, this is from the Kybalion space. This is not from an ego sense of, I am different. Because the normal exists now, I can be different, I can be special. But literally my expression of living my life in this way can only exist because that exists. This also raises the question of, are you the creator? Or are you a small fragment within a greater mind? When you think of the first principle that the all is mind, it's easy to see how if there's this all that is mind, which is not a being, it's not a being. If there is this all that is mind, oppositions can only exist at the same time. We can't have this opposition exist over here if this doesn't also exist. They have to come together and appear in an axis, in an opposition that is the same but different to a degree. And so in observing my lifestyle, it absolutely encourages me to believe and have faith in this idea of the all that is mind, that we are fractals within, that my mind is one fractal of the greater mind. An interesting thing I wanted to kind of mix in here is I like bringing in the map of consciousness explained by Dr. David Hawkins. Has one of the closest correlations to the initial teachings of the Hermes Trismegistus through the Kybalion of all of the, philosophical, or at least the modern philosophical teachings. There's a lot of ancient teachings that get very close, but many modern teachings kind of neglect certain parts, and I'm sure the map of consciousness does too, but there's a lot of interesting parts of it that I believe is like, in a way, it's almost like the perfect version of a logical conscious prefrontal cortex version of the ancient wisdom and the heart-centeredness of the teachings of the Kybalion. But the map of consciousness kind of overlaps something here. And it's that through the principle of polarity, it gives us a guiding point. It gives us this guiding light because of the fact that oppositions provide growth paths. Because we are in an experience, just like when we are in zodiacs, on the zodiac axis. We are stuck in this axis, and to some extent, it's not that you are limited by this archetype, because life is not limited linearly like that. However, there's a code, there's like a flavor, a frequency that tends to, when we are in an emotional experience, we're in this flavor of frequency. And until we transmute that, alchemize that experience, we're in that frequency band. And I think of it that way, like we're in this frequency band, and you've got these different bands here. And let's say we're in this frequency band, that we're in the emotional experience here of, let's say, hate. When we're in this emotional frequency, if we're in this band, and let's say we're locked into this frequency band, going to courage to resolve hate is not going to work. It will work if that courage is guiding you on the axis of love. Love and hate are a connected axis. And so what the principle of polarity teaches is that we don't resolve hate with courage. We don't resolve suffering with love. We don't resolve suffering with love even. What is the real code of your tuning into yourself and actually being able to have an accurate reading of what emotional state you're in is very important here, of course, because otherwise, yeah, sure, you might think that resolving it with love, resolving your suffering with love is actually working, but maybe it's because you're actually in hate. Doesn't matter. These are all kind of just convoluted details here. However, principle of polarity can give you this guiding light, North Star path to growth, path out of your low vibrational state by looking at the axis opposing you. And I think the perfect example of this also is astrology. Me and Isabel have a series about your north node because arguably, in our opinion, your north node is probably the most important point in your birth chart. I'm sure there other ones are important too, but potentially in terms of embracing your highest self and stepping into your wisdom and your path to growth and embracing and healing the karma of your lifestyle right now, stepping into your north node and knowing your north node is easily the most important point on your birth chart. And just like that north node, your south node is the opposite part. North node is what's hardest for you to embrace, and your south node is the thing that you're great at but you overuse to a fault. And so if you're in your south node, just like if you were in an experience of hate, we overuse it, we're in it. And the opposition, our north node, on the exact axis, gives us a path forward. So myself, I have a south node in Capricorn, and my north node is Cancer, which means to embrace that little bit more motherly energy, that nurturing, supportive energy, that free-flowing emotional state. That is the path to growth. And just in the same way, yes, you can use your astrology, but also if you are just in an experience of, say, suffering, your path to growth is to experience pleasure. Or perhaps not suffering. If you're experiencing pain, then your path to growth is to embrace emotions of pleasure for yourself, not necessarily. And again, this is where alchemy comes in, because if we know that our world is an energetic reality, we can't be waiting on the external world to do things for us. We are creator beings. When you study the Kybalion, when you study the 7 Hermetic teachings, you are taking responsibility and ownership for the fact that you are this creator. You are a creator here in this plane of existence, and you can't be waiting for other things to happen to you, and you can't be believing that everything physical is all that there is. And if you're watching this video, you probably already know that by now. So stepping into pleasure, stepping into love, stepping into abundance requires shifting your inner emotional state, but it becomes this North Star in terms of your intention and your attention. So healing your hate, sometimes, yes, there's other journaling activities, there's different breathworks, there's meditations you can do, but much of the teaching of the Principle of Polarity in our path to growth, in our path to creating that emotional liberation, is about placing our intention on the opposite axis. And when we place our intention on the opposite axis, it brings us toward the middle. Maybe we go all the way, but ideally, many people say that, and I'll touch on this a little later, the Principle of Polarity, many people say that we are trying to stay in the gray space in the middle. I think that's partly true, because again, like I said, when you go to the furthest extremes, that's how bad things, we express ourselves in the worst ways as humans, when we're really, really in hate and when we are in evil. We're trying to stay more toward the middle. But of course, can we really know what the extreme ends are? Only we can know in our personal experience. So we're trying to constantly check in with ourselves and noticing where we are on axes. And when we are in these axes, it requires self-awareness to be able to stop ourselves and swing back the other direction. And there's a law of rhythm. The principle of rhythm comes in. Bringing back kind of what I started with at the beginning of this video, polarity creates this realm. Polarity is what allows us to have physical reality. The three-dimensional reality consists of opposition to have substance. And the interesting part to me is how this principle became very closely followed in the ancient Vedic teachings, like the original Vedic scriptures and the original yogic teachings, which came from the Vedas. And in the Vedas, they teach there's the word Maya that comes up a lot. And the Maya and you'll see this root word Maya show up a lot of times throughout yoga. You have prana Maya, and Maya repeats itself often in other words in the Vedic scriptures. But Maya is the illusion. Maya is said to be the illusion that is created through opposition, duality, and polarity. Maya is said to be basically a blanket of duality that exists over the world. But the Maya is the illusion. And so it acknowledges essentially that we are living in an illusory plane of existence. And that plane of existence can only exist because oppositions exist and because duality exists. And because duality exists, it signifies to us that there is a oneness that underlies all of it. Through polarity, it creates the gray space, the illusion. The gray space is the illusion. Through these opposite poles, we now have a blanket in the middle that is tossed over this realm, this dimension, that creates this illusion that we can operate through. And so Maya, I believe that the closest translation or many people say the closest translation of the word Maya is to say the veil. So the veil of existence, the illusion of existence is duality, is polarity, which is what the principle of polarity is saying in the first place. This is highly resembles the original story of Adam and Eve, which is what many people say is that they fell from oneness into duality, and that story echoes in shocking resemblance to the Maya and to the principle of polarity, which is basically everyone agreeing that the dimension that we're living on is conducted and created, though illusion, even though it's illusion, it's created through opposition, it's created through duality, and it's created through polarity. There's another great quote that I wanted to share from Ralph Waldo Emerson, who is a great writer, one of the best writers of all time in my personal opinion. And the quote is that polarity, or action and reaction, we meet in every part of nature. In darkness and light, in heat and cold, in the ebb and flow of waters, in male and female, in the inspiration and expiration of plants and animals, in the equation of quantity and quality in the fluids of the animal body, in the systole and diasystole of the human heart, I probably pronounced that wrong, in the centrifugal and centripetal gravity, in electricity, galvanism, and chemical affinity. Excuse me if I pronounced something wrong. So when I say something like our three-dimensional reality only exists because opposition exists, that's a great way to explain it, because of the fact that we cannot have darkness without light. We wouldn't know it, just like you couldn't know love without hate. The more literal application of this is that we wouldn't know what light is if we didn't know what darkness was. At the same time, there's also this interesting component that Ralph Waldo Emerson touched on in that quote, and that the principle of polarity absolutely implies and is meant for you to understand, is that there is a yin within and every yang. This is also how the principle of polarity works here. Because they are on the same axis, they are tied together. But because they are tied together, you see one in the other and one in the other in the opposite. I like to use the zodiac example because it's easy to see, but like, take for example the Virgo and the Pisces. They're both these selfless servants in a way. And so because they have this common thread, when you are living in the action of, or when you're living in the expression of this axis, this frequency band that you're living within, how do you distinguish how do you distinguish which is within the other and which the other is within? Is the light within the darkness, or is the darkness within the light? Yin and yang are bound. And though I use the example of axes, I think it's also important to understand that they are bound. And because they are bound, it requires our own deduction, our own wise perception to be able to see which one are we in. And maybe there's a part of us that does need to accept that it doesn't have to be separate. Maybe black doesn't need to be black and white doesn't need to be white. Maybe it's okay to understand that we are in the axis of black and white, but we are here in gray. And perhaps, for example, darkness might be in light and light might be in darkness, but most of our life that we go through, we're somewhere in the middle. When we watch a sunset, where are we? Are we halfway through darkness, or are we halfway into the light? When we are hot and cold are another example. When we're boiling water, is it hot or is it cold? Well, how hot can hot be? We don't, just because we might have the temperature of boiling, is that hot itself? Boiling water is an incredible service to our lives here in the three-dimensional plane of existence, and yet we don't have to say that is the highest heat of hot that hot can be. We might know what ice is, but do we know that that's as cold can be? We have this gray space in the middle, and understanding that they are all bound not only lets us look at life from a sense of mystery and wonder of seeing that, oh wow, I really don't know what the potential of the capability of the extreme of the opposition is. But maybe I can start to see, can I see the good within the bad? Can I see the light within the darkness? Can I use this to be able to have a sense of wisdom and look through my life and not just see things as black and white. Now there's a last few things I really quickly want to mention, and these are just some things that, like I said, when I go through this book right now, my goal is not to be the most comprehensive I can possibly be, because it's impossible. However, I'm just sharing the things that have come up for me, the questions that arise for me, and maybe I'm missing some questions, but these are the ones that ruminate most closely for me. And the biggest one that has come up for me is it best to stay in the middle? And I kind of touched on this, but I think what was interesting is that, you can't know the extreme. That is probably what this question brought up to me initially, because when I first learned the Principle of Polarity, I was immediately overwhelmed with the amount of people that were saying it's best to stay in the middle. And I would agree, because I've, like what I said, you don't want to swing so deeply into your hate. You don't want to embrace such a hate that you do bad things, and you embrace now you becoming an evil. The evil is the most evil expression of yourself. We're here to experience high vibrational frequencies, not low vibrational frequencies. That's how we evolve and embrace wisdom and embrace purpose. However, I also think it's interesting the idea of like stay in the middle. I don't think that's necessarily the goal. I don't think that, because like I said, as within so without, if we stayed in the middle, we would never go without. We would never have this rhythmic flow and law of rhythm. We would never swing into our high vibrational existence if we are not willing to go into the frequencies on the opposition side. Using the zodiacs as an example, we don't have the capacity to embrace emotional freedom and emotional fluidity, nurturance, support, and truly nurturing people unless we have the capacity to embrace a bit of a more masculine and solid, disciplinary, responsibility-oriented approach to our lives, approach to the structuring our lives, and commitment to the structure and the foundations before embracing that nurturance and that emotional expression and that nurturance. This is just one example, and this would be like, I think all the aspects of our life we have to be willing to embrace the hate if we want to feel love. This is, again, does not to say that you should experience hate and take it out on everyone. That's your emotional frequency. Now you're putting that on other people. You need to own your energy. So when you are experiencing pain and suffering and lack, have faith you are going to make it out of this, but you also need to be brutally honest with yourself that you are in this frequency and you are letting yourself be victim to this frequency. And you are probably only experiencing this opposition, this side of the opposition, because some part of you feels victim. Something else outside of you happened to you, and now you are in suffering. Now you are in pain. Yes, sometimes it isn't, but this is part of life. Life is the expression of these oppositions. Life is polarity. So embrace it. We don't need to constantly stay in the middle and feel nothing, because guess what? When we try to feel nothing, not feel the extremes, you are actually not preventing it from happening at all. All you're doing is bottling up inside that eventually will come out in a larger burst. Or worse, if you're trying to contain it, literally you're freezing all the energy that's happening inside of you, regardless of whether you allow it to happen. And all that energy is now combusting inside of you instead of combusting in an outward expression. And this is what ends up causing chronic disease, because literally energy is not in motion, and energy is getting stuck on different endocrine glands in your body and different organs in your body and different areas of your body. And it's literally locking up and freezing. And now your health is not even operating. So is it best to stay in the middle? Yes and no. An interesting part that I want to touch on is the idea of relationships. I am not one to talk about the polarity in relationships, because a part of me just feels like it's so over talked about that I feel like this aspect of talking about polarity in relationships is just a trend, and so I didn't really touch on it in this video. However, polarity arises a lot in relationships, and I think but I think it's almost over talked about how it's just about masculine and feminine. We're going to get into the principle of gender later about masculine and feminine energies, but polarity is all about kind of realizing that I think there's when two individuals meet, and whether that's as friends, as partners, whether that's as business partners, whether that's as siblings, whether that's as mother and daughter, mother and father, or mother and son, father and daughter, whatever it is. I think having understanding of the principle of polarity can help you recognize how you can complement one another in life. The zodiacs are kind of a great example of the different versions of how you complement each other. So for example, Virgo and Pisces axis. They're both these selfless people. But the Virgo is has such an attention to detail, and the opposition of Pisces is that they have no attention to detail at all. They're in the clouds, they're in their dreams. And for example, if you were to take those components and put them into two people who are interacting closely together as partners, then you create complementation. Complementation? I think that's the word. And that complementariness is a great way to show us how the principle of polarity helps us to better interact in relationships. Yes, you got feminine and masculine, that all these relationship experts are talking about how women have to embrace their femininity and men have to embrace their masculinity to have more compatible relationships. Totally. But other aspects too. It's not just masculine and feminine. Thinking about the zodiacs is a very, very helpful. Don't use it as a strict dogma, but it's a very, very helpful component of being able to say well, what things am I good at? What parts of me kind of fall into, am I a little bit more Gemini-esque? Am I a little bit more Taurus-esque? Are those just aspects of myself that I tend to be good at? And that can kind of just be a good guideline for what is the yang complement to that? Or vice versa, what is the yin complement to that? What is the opposition that has a fundamental thread between them? And also is the opposite that I can use to complement this other person in my life, and to use our skills and our gifts and our talents to our advantage to better operate in this world, to better create something, produce something, do something spectacular. And last but not least, what does the principle of polarity imply about life and death? So how I was saying earlier how we can't know the extreme opposition. We can't know the most extreme point on the axis is. We can only know what we know. We can only know what we have perceived and experienced. I can only know hate if I have known love, but what if there's something beyond hate? What if there's something beyond love? And I can only know cold. I think an ice cube's cold, and I think that boiling water is hot. But something else probably exists. I don't know. I've never experienced it. I can only say I know, even though you can't know anything. I can only say I know if I've experienced it directly. And so life and death is an interesting one, because we're operating on this idea that we think we know what life is, and we think we know what death is. But do we know? Have you experienced death to know that this is life? Have you experienced your life enough to know for sure that death exists? Have you truly embodied what an expression of living your life is? To know for certain that death is going to happen after. That's a big one to ponder. And that one I don't want to say more on, because I believe that it cannot truly be answered, because how do I know if I'm living my life? I think I am. I think I'm living my life perhaps in a closer expression of the extreme of what life is than perhaps many people, but I don't know. I can't know. And that's what the beautiful thing about the Hermetic teachings are. It's open to interpretation in a good way, not in a bad way, not as in there's nothing foundational about it. There's a lot of great foundations in there, but because we're trying to take higher dimensional wisdom in many ways, and I say higher dimensional because I think it's trying to teach something that can't be comprehended into words, and we're trying to put it into words, and we're trying to say it and explain it. We're trying our best here to figure it out. So ponder that one, life and death. Now, as promised, I like to share at the end of these videos some actual steps to mastering this principle. Actual steps to not just take this data and let it be data, because we are so obsessed with data in this day and age. How many YouTube videos do you watch a day? I'm not judging, I'm just saying, because I'm just as bad. I go and constantly research articles. And what am I doing with this information? Am I applying it to myself? We are here on this earth to shift into a higher vibrational existence. We're here to live our purpose, live our best lives, go after our desires, and overcome the obstacles on the way. That's what living our purpose is. That's what being the hero of your story is. And so here's how you're going to apply this principle. The first one is simple. See the yin within the yang. See that in your oppositions, you are this person. So let's use people as for example. When you see a person that you dislike, you have hate for, see the love in it. When you see someone who's just your opposite and you say, oh, they're so different from me. Well, first you say, well, thank you. You allow me to be me. But also you say, you're my opposite, so I am within you. I am within everything that is in my opposite, and that is going to awaken you to the first thing I said. It's going to awaken you to having a love for people that you didn't think that you were capable of. We're used to going through our lives and just immediately feeling a degree of hate. Not the fullest expression of hate, but a degree, because there's all the gray space. And a degree of dislike. Dislike would probably be a degree of hate. To dislike or feel neutral toward people. But if we see a little bit more of that yin within our yang, within the yang, if the yang that we're operating through and we see something that seems to be the opposite, a subtle dislike, can we go and can we say, oh, well, that means there's something within me there. There's something within my perception that is there. And so can it bring me back into love a little bit? The second aspect of embracing and mastering the principle of polarity is to use your opposite as a North Star. Use your opposition as a path to growth, as a journey towards embracing your weakness. And maybe that means something as simple as starting to embrace your North Node. Maybe you don't have to go it alone in terms of figuring out what your own overused axis is. Instead of having to go, oh, I don't know what axis I'm on in terms of the dimensions of frequencies and the energy that I'm embodying and overusing. Maybe you can just look at the roadmap. Go look at your natal chart. Go check out our channel and figure out what your North Node is by pulling up your chart, and look at our videos on the North Nodes for your sign, for your house, and then you can go and say, oh wow, that makes sense. That's not what I'm necessarily great at embracing, but absolutely that makes sense, that's my path to growth. Using polarity to be your path to growth, to create harmony, to create balance, to shift into the higher vibrational version of yourself, the more energetically balanced version of yourself, instead of overusing this thing you're constantly overusing. And again, like I said, with the map of consciousness, use the emotional code that you get stuck in. So when you're in an experience of sadness, lack, pain, suffering, use it to create your opposite axis. It's very simple sometimes. Sometimes you don't need to use your North Node. Sometimes you can go, I feel sad right now, and so I need to focus my attention and intention on the opposition of that axis, which is joy. And the third and final step that I want to share with you for mastering the principle of polarity is to consider how you can complement the important people in your lives. And this is what I said in the last part of this video here. We look at the principle of polarity in relationships a little bit too strictly, a little too regimentedly, as like, oh, there's masculine and there's feminine. Sure, yes, okay, principle of gender. But how can you look at all the important people in your lives? You don't need to do this for everyone, just the people that really matter to you, that you're really trying to interact with. People you're truly trying to care about, you're trying to create something with. You know, I think about this principle, and I think about it with each one of my siblings, because I'm very close with all my siblings. I think about it with both of my parents. I think about it when, I'm trying to go through all of my close friends. I think about this with. And I use this principle to go and say, okay, well, this person is like this. Or maybe, everyone's a free-flowing expression. So don't get too tied up in this, but, what are some traits that these people commonly express? Get out a journal and do this. Think about all the people in your lives and kind of list out some of their traits. And people might be all over the place because they're contrary in nature too. They are a contradiction by nature. But listing out their traits and thinking about, you don't want to change yourself for them. However, in terms of sometimes the actions we do are not who we are. We aren't what we do. But can we have, the compassion to care for these people in our lives by noticing the similarity in ourselves, and we can look at their traits and go, okay, well, we have this in common. Maybe I can embrace this opposition to better complement them so that we can better, more harmoniously work together to be this beautiful expression, to be this beautiful expression of creation, of creating things, creating businesses, creating experiences. And can we use this to both embrace more of a joy for living and our own personal purposes? So that wraps up my overview of the principle of polarity. Again, I'm sure it was super long. I lose track of time when I'm making these videos because I just get going on my entire thought process of what I think about the principle of polarity. So now I want to hear what you think. Let me know what if I missed any really important parts of the principle of polarity that you have come up with and that you've discovered on your personal journey. Because again, I'm not comprehensive. I don't know everything about the principle of polarity. This is only my personal journey. But let me know if I missed anything in the comments below, and let me know if there's anything that resonated particularly for you about the principle of polarity. If there's anything I shared that helped open your eyes to a little bit more understanding and wisdom implemented it into your own personal journey. And if you like this video, don't forget to hit the like button, as it helps this video be seen by more people. And if you haven't already, if you're not already subscribed to our YouTube channel, be sure to subscribe to Be the Hero Academy, because everything we do here at Be the Hero Academy is here to help you be the hero of your story. And in the end, it comes down to basically the gist of what Hermes Trismegistus was teaching, which is about psychology, alchemy, and astrology. Isabel is our astrology expert, and she helps you to embrace your energetic imprint so that you can better live your purpose, live a more joyful expression, and live in your highest vibration. Whereas Robin and I, we really like to try to help you transmute your alchemy, transform your alchemy, transform your past inner child hurts, your past traumas, so that you can actually start to shift the energy within you, be the hero of your story, shift your thought process, rewire your brain, and make the shift in your psychology, just like the Kybalion teaches. So if you haven't already, go subscribe to our YouTube channel. I promise you, you will not be disappointed by all the videos that we put out. Thank you guys for joining me in this video. Namaste.